Welcome to the Viewless Wings Poetry Podcast, where we celebrate the craft of poetry. Each week, we feature interviews with incredible poets and artists, including Olivia Gatwood and A.E. Stallings, and original poetry read by the authors. I'm your host, James Moorhead, Poet Laureate of Dublin, California, and author of Canvas and Portraits of Red and Gray. Lisa Marie Simmons is a Boulder, Colorado native, singer-songwriter, essayist, and published poet currently based in Italy. She recently joined the Grammy award-winning artist signed to the American label Ropeadope Records, who released her poetic musical album NoteSpeak in March 2020, which received a 4-star review from the iconic Downbeat magazine. The American debut of NoteSpeak was at the Jaipur Literature Festival in Boulder, Colorado in September 2017. She was invited to be a speaker and performer at the 70th Conference on World Affairs at the University of Colorado in April 2018. In November 2019, she presented NoteSpeak in Italy, Austria, and Prague. In January 2020, she presented NoteSpeak in India on the Jaipur music stage. For more information on her published essays, stories, and poems scattered across the webiverse, head to her website. See our show notes for details. Her music can be found wherever you listen online. I'm excited to welcome Lisa Marie Simmons all the way from Italy to the Viewless Wings Poetry Podcast. So, Lisa, when do you first remember writing poetry, and when did creating poetry become part of your identity?
First of all, thank you so much for that introduction. I'm really happy to be here with you. When did I first start writing poetry? I wrote really, really bad poetry from the time that I was in junior high school, let's say. I started writing poetry, and then it quickly evolved into writing songs. But really with a poetic bent. You know, I grew up, my mother listened to a lot of folk music. So Bob Dylan, Joni Mitchell, Joan Baez, James Taylor, all very poetic writers, you know. So that was a huge influence on me. And then on my father's side was the jazz bent. But I'm very much a wordsmith, and I think that was a huge contribution. That, as well as literature, was a huge influence on me. And, you know, my mother would read to us when we were children. And so that had a huge influence on my imagination and the power of the pictures that you can create with wordplay.
So your backstory is extraordinary, of being adopted, abused, and abandoned, the racism of your adopted grandparents, and ultimately meeting your birth family. It's just incredible to read. So anyone listening to this podcast, definitely Google Lisa Marie Simmons and read her backstory. How has that story influenced your writing?
Oh, gosh, in so many different ways. I think it's been healing to be able to write, because it's a way that I have processed everything that sort of happened as it came along, you know, and not just through writing, but as I was saying before about music and literature, those were kind of things that opened up my world, allowed me to see that there was something beyond what I was living in, and also to relate to others who have gone through traumatic events, right? So it really created empathy, learning about and listening to and reading, and then doing it myself was a great way to process everything that I sort of was going through. I lost your question. You were saying, how did it influence my writing? And so I also have a great drive to speak to others, to do that same thing that was done for me when I was listening to those songs or having the radio close up to my head while there was fighting in the other room, and that was something I could dive into. And I want to do the same for anybody else who might be listening to whatever it is that I have to say. And so that is a huge part of my creative process is thinking of the listener.
So you've used your words and music not just to entertain, but to support causes you care about. I'm thinking of ampersand families as an example. When writing, how do you balance your poetry and music with a message you are trying to convey and make sure the poetry still shines through along with the message?
Oh, that's such a beautiful question. Nobody's ever asked me anything like that. It's all a balancing act though, isn't it? The
Mm-hmm.
writing, especially when you're trying to do it with music. And we very much, as far as the poetic project is concerned, we want to make sure that they're really intricately entwined, not just this is a poem and here's some music and then we put it together. We write them together, but that's a whole different thing. As far as causes that I care deeply about, I work with whoever it is that is commissioned the piece to see what is the message that they want out there more than anything else, and then just find the prettiest way to impart that message with the most efficacy as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because you don't want to alienate, and that's I think it stood me really in really good stead that I'm a songwriter as well, because writing songs is you have just this little teeny tiny space, the same way as you do in poetry, to say a lot, to say so much, right? So it's just about getting to the heart of the matter in a way that will reach the widest audience possible, as far as doing work for NGOs and things like that, so, and it's the same way when I'm speaking about my sort of personal intimate details. I don't want to alienate anyone, and I don't want to dump on
Mm-hmm.
anyone, right? So that's about finding the beauty in the message, and in a way that's relatable. And also, I think it's great when the listener can take their own meaning from it, that you're not spoon feeding the meaning. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just a delicate balance through all of that.
Oh, that's terrific. And I want to go a little deeper on something you started to talk about, which is the differences between poetry and words set to music and poetry and music. And I'm thinking of an interview with Billy Collins where he talked about a couple of he got arm twisted to have a couple of his poems set to music that weren't originally intended to be set to music, and he said it didn't work very well. And he also had a poem animated, which is what triggered my inspiration to get one of my poems animated, and that works much better, right? So I'm curious, how is it? What's different? What's the same about writing words to stand alone and writing words that are intended to be backed or incorporated into music?
Yeah, again a beautiful question, and it's really interesting what you said about the animation. I think the visual element really helps if they're two separate things, the music and the poetry. But I'm very much inspired by people like Gil Scott-Heron and his poetry and music. That he worked really closely with everyone that was in the band to create these things, and that's what Marco and I do as well. Because it's all about rhythm, isn't it? Even if I'm writing a poem that's going to stand alone, and actually we can sort of the poems that I'll read after this segment, one of them was written to stand alone, and one was written with music in mind. And I so that might be a good example for you. But it's just an internal rhythm when I'm not writing with music, or I'm working on a very specific structure and finding my rhythm in that. When I'm working with music, I want the echo of the words to be in the music, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
Like both the music could stand alone that Marco writes, and my poetry I hope can stand alone, but they are exponentially greater when they're entwined.
Yeah, so building on that, you're a member of Hippie Tendencies and NoteSpeak, and in those contexts, it's a collaboration. Although when I write poetry, I'm part of a poetry critique group. I actually have a poetry coach who I workshop with,
That's
and
fantastic.
and actually I'm interviewing him for he's in an upcoming episode of this podcast. Terrific guy.
Oh,
Um,
great. I'll look out for that.
yes, yes. Um, so how does that collaboration with musicians influence the poetry? And are there situations where they go, look, something needs to change here because it's challenging our ability to get the music right? Does that happen?
Right.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Well, so basically, Marco is, who's my partner, is the pianist and the arranger of the NoteSpeak and Hippie Tendency songs. So we live together and work together, and often what we do is I'm at the top of the house in my office and he's downstairs in the studio, and I can hear him sometimes working on something and it'll infiltrate into my work. And we have been working together for so long that we are really connected, and he's the best partner I've had to collaborate with. So we do workshop the material together before it even gets to the other musicians. Like, it's just the two of us, and there might be something that he just thinks doesn't work, or that I think doesn't work. And we collaborate in many ways. Sometimes I will bring a musical phrase to him, and sometimes he'll give me a great idea or concept for a poem. So it's a great collaboration because we both work on both things. And as far as the poetry is concerned, when I'm really happy with a poem, he is the one who adapts. He doesn't expect me to, when I've gotten to the place where I'm like, this I think is beautiful and perfect, he agrees with me, and we will adapt the music to reflect the poetry. That's normally how we do it. But everyone is different. Every poem is different, honestly. We have just different processes. But over dinner each night, we just talk about the progress that we're making on the project that we are currently involved in, and inspire each other. And it informs both his work and mine, and helps us. And we both know each other so well now as well, that I kind of know where he's going to go. He sometimes just sends me the music first, and that inspires me to write. So it depends. It depends on the poem.
Yeah, no, I know some poets I've spoken to, they get really stressed out about prompts and some sort of commission. I'm the opposite. Give me a prompt. Oh my goodness, give me a starting point, and I'll I'll find the poetry in it.
Yeah.
So I think
I love to work in many different ways because I think it keeps it fresh. I think if you get into a rut of only wanting to write this way, I think that the work tends to then be very similar, whereas if you are able to get outside of your comfort zone and do it in a different way, it can really, for me personally, as a writer, it really helps me to grow.
Totally agree. So I binged a whole bunch of your music preparing for this interview, which was totally wonderful. Actually, it was not work. So sometimes you sing, sometimes it's spoken word, sometimes it's a mix. How do you choose which works better for a piece of music or a portion of piece, or is it completely intuitive? It's not something you're conscious of.
That's again super interesting. Well, so usually what happens is we have a project in mind, like Identity for Hippie Tendencies. I was really focused on, I was looking for, well, I hadn't started looking for my birth parents at that point. I was sort of just questioning what my identity was, right? So I had this concept for the album, and I wanted it all sung because it's such heavy material. And so I wanted that contrast where that it could lighten it up a bit with singing it, and as far as the spoken word that followed with NoteSpeak, here I was really inspired by a piece that was on Identity that we adapted from Joan Baez, excuse me, who wrote for Sacco e Vanzetti. There's the film. So the story of Sacco and Vanzetti, who were killed in America for a crime they didn't commit, which will lead us. It's a nice segue to my poem.
Yeah.
But so we took two songs from the film and we combined them, and it comes from letters that Vanzetti was sending to his father in Italy, and they were so beautiful, these letters, and he was really just sort of accepting their fate and trying to reassure his father, and still didn't lose his faith in humanity, right? And so we combined these letters with a part that was sung. And mostly I just declaimed these letters and on stage with hippie tendencies. And we were astounded by the reaction of the public. We used these to talk about immigration because here in Italy, there is such a debate about all the people who
Mm-hmm.
arrive via Lampedusa and so many people who condemn those immigrants, and we use that to sort of say, well, listen, you not so long ago were in the same situation going into the United States. So we wanted to open that conversation, and it really struck a chord with audiences. And so that made me want to continue to explore the spoken. And I'll add that I was saying earlier that with songs, you're trying to get to an essence and try to pare things down. With spoken, I feel like I have a lot more room
Mm-hmm.
to be a lot more sort of in your face and direct. And it's the format, the medium allows that. So it was nice to have that freedom and not be quite parsing my words quite so much.
No, I really enjoyed that both were incorporated because they're different tools and they have different tones. It's very interesting to hear how you did think about it. So you're in Italy, which my wife's Italian. I've been back to Italy many, many times. Um,
And next time you'll have to come visit. We'll have to have a dinner.
Absolutely. I am just itching to get on an international flight when COVID is less of a factor. I just love Italy so much. So Italy's renowned for its art and architecture, its people. How did you find your way to Italy, and how has life in Italy influenced your art?
Oh gosh. Okay, so the way I found my way to Italy is a super long. I have a very long answer to that, and I'll make it really short. I went from Boulder, Colorado to New York City, where I studied theater and art and music, and then I went from New York City to France to Juan Lepin and Valenciennes in the north, and then I went from France to Saint Martin, which on the French side of the island, and then from there I went to Amsterdam to Holland. I lived there for a couple of years, and then I went from there to South America, Central America, where I met my ex-husband, and he's Italian. And so then I came to Italy, and my ex-husband and I split up, but my band by that time was put together, Hippie Tendencies, and that was my family. And so I didn't leave. I just got stuck here. As far as how it's informed my art, in so many ways. I mean, all of these cultures, all of these different cultures, and one of the things, and this also will lead is a good segue to one of the poems that I'll read afterwards, is I think that the more that you travel, the more that you realize how much we have in common, how similar we are. For all of the beauty of each different culture, the reality is we all fall in love. We all, get angry. We all are curious. Like the human nature, and what binds us, I find fascinating and beautiful. And then the other thing that about Italy is the fact of Afro-Italians, the fact that people think of Italy and think only of white people, and there's this whole world there that I find fascinating and has really had a huge impact on the work of late.
Terrific. You've brought poetry to share, so I'll hand the mic over to you, and then we'll talk about them.
Okay, excellent. This first one is called Last Supper. Give me some steak and eggs with toast or that crispy fried chicken, tea, coffee, and a Coke. Sometimes it's all eaten, sometimes it's left there. Believe it can't ever be. It's never ever fair. Food that has no sustenance, that sticks in your craw, though James and Peter, John and Andrew will tell you that it's law. Baked potatoes sliced in half, butter oozing through, southern meal just for you, salt rubbed on the wound. Just shut up now and chew. Enchiladas, sausages, ribs, and tater tots. George Junius and Leo Jones, just two among the lot. Truth ain't what they got. Murder fought with murder. All done in his name. Dead and done now, buried deep. Who we gotta blame? The innocent, the guilty sat up on the block. Murder fought with murder. Tick, tick tock. Odell Barnes' last meal, the richest of them all, he called and called for justice and please equality. For dessert, he asked solemnly for peace around the world. And individually one is the next poem. The blue throat's song, trillingly clear and sweet, though one heartbeat in flight, they're each unique. While we remain here tethered still and weak, convinced that we are made just to compete, believing there's a hierarchy to seat. We tussle, wreaking havoc as we shriek. Without our sense of self, there's no mystique. But we should know by now there's no elite. Undulate rainbows, merging colored fins, attuned to each other, they swim as one. Our beauty lies within these suits of skins, intrinsic nature. Everything is sun.
Thank you so much. Those are both beautiful and so different. So we'll start with Last Supper. So Last Supper immediately brought to mind the mission of the Innocence Project, how they seek to tell the stories of the wrongly incarcerated. And I immediately Googled the names Odell Barnes, George Junius, Leo Jones after reading the poem. There are so many tragic stories you could weave into your poem. How did you choose these stories?
Oh my gosh. So there's a wonderful, I love the Innocent Project. I'm a supporter as well. And I agree with you on that. And I just came across a work of photography by a guy called Henry Hargreaves. And it's called The Last Meals of Death Row Inmates. So look that up. And he found out what the last meals of many inmates were, and then took photographs of them. And it's very striking and very emotional to look at. And so I looked through those and was inspired by those. And then I thought in this piece, I wanted to represent both people who had been wrongly accused and executed, as well as those who perhaps probably did commit their crimes, because I believe that it is never right to murder someone. And I don't believe that in capital punishment, at all. So I thought it would be good to find different cases, and then the reason that it ends up with Odell Barnes is because he is the one that probably did do his crime, but in the last thing that he asked for his meal, he asked for justice, equality, and world peace.
Hmm.
That was his request for his last meal. So I thought that was a fitting end to the poem. And the other two that are in it are because they were innocent, and it's just so tragic,
Yeah. So I'm struck by the simplicity of the poem and how that simplicity and straightforward, unembellished telling makes the message even more powerful. What is your approach to revising and editing a poem like this and you've talked about this earlier, kind of getting the tone right, the balance, the sensitivity of it, having people be able to think beyond the poem, but at the same point, there is a core message here. I mean, there's a lot that you're wrestling with, and yet you end up with this beautifully simple and powerful piece. So what was the revision and editing process for this poem?
Thank you so much. That's really kind of you to say. I tend to do a ton of research for every single poem. I really try to dig deep into that, and that helps when you're in the editing process. At least for me, because the more research I do, the more information that I have, and I'm able to sort of weed through all that and find what has struck me most deeply. So that, first of all, before I even get to the editing process, I think that research for me is really important. And then as far as editing is concerned, I edit and edit and edit and edit a ton. And I think one of the most helpful things for me is the reading of it aloud, alone in my room. And every poem or every subject matter requires a different approach. And I think that being very sort of simple and direct with this made made sense because we all know what, as soon as you hear the Last Supper, you can think about what that means. And I, whatever poem I do, even if it is simplistic, I try to write in layers so that each time you read it, you're going to take something more from it. So that is really an important part of the editing process. Like, is this too simplistic? Like, now that I've decided that this, because of the subject matter, a direct approach is the best approach. Is it too direct? And am I, so I just continue to question myself, and try to get all those important details that I've searched for in the research process into the poem.
Wonderful. So, just a couple more things. So, individually, one is rich in rhymes. Couplet
Yeah.
couplets are hard enough in English. So you went even further and had the first 8 lines rhyme. How did you approach the rhyming challenge in this poem? And did part of you wish you'd written in Italian, where, let's face it, the rhyming is a lot easier in Italian?
It's so true, so true. I don't write in Italian, though I'm fluent in Italian. But I don't write because it doesn't feel natural
Mhm.
to me. And I've never even really approached it. But I'm so in love with the English language, and so and I love rhyming because it's such a challenge, because to stay away from the trite and the banal, and try to do something different and new. So I love rhyming, um, and I thought that it was appropriate here to rhyme because I'm talking about unity. And for this poem, I was inspired by, I'm surely going to mess up his name. His name is Akatu, Akutagawa. Akutagawa. He's called the father of the Japanese short story, and he
Mhm.
has a quote that is, individually we are one drop, together we are an ocean. And then I was thinking of the fact that birds are a symbol of the human soul, right? So starting out with those, and thinking of unity, it seems to me it makes sense to rhyme, because it gives a sense of unity, at least to
Mhm.
me, as we do it. And yeah, you're right. It's not at all simple to do if you want to try to avoid the trite, but it's just a great challenge, and it's a really fun way to work.
Terrific. And just one
I'm not
last
sure if I answered
question.
your
Oh,
question.
that's no, that's perfect. That's perfect. I'm always fascinated by the thought process behind poetry. So one
Me
last
too.
thing. What are you working on now that has you really excited?
Okay, well, those two poems that you heard are going to be on the new NoteSpeak album. So, it's interesting for me because I have them in my head with the music, and I read them differently than they will be heard on the album. Uh, the Last Supper also has a part that's sung to it that I did not include in this reading. So I'm working on that, and then I also have a project, an album that's going to be coming out soon, with a guy called Gianni Cazzola, who is an Italian drummer. He's 85 years old, and I had this magical concert with him. We'd never met. I don't remember how we ended up having this concert, but either he called me or I called him for a last minute gig that somebody had canceled, and we just did a bunch of covers. And he is the only drummer who's worked with Billie Holiday, Chet
Mm.
Baker, Eartha Kitt, all these great, wonderful classic. And he's just a little piece of history, right? So we had this show in this open piazza a couple of years ago, and it was just one of those magical nights where the audience and the band were just communicating. We've never played together. It was just, there was candles out on the piazza, and people just sat down and really got into it. So after that, we said, okay, we've got a good vibe going on. We should make it. He said we got to make an album together. So we took time to do that, and we did it in the old-fashioned way, with all of us in a room, and what comes out, because since we had that experience on stage. So we just finished recording that, and we'll be putting that out soon enough. And then, yeah, and the NoteSpeak too. And then I'm working on an outline for my book, because I'm going to be writing about all that stuff, that background that you were talking about. So I've been working on that as well. I've got a lot of essays that I put out all across the Webiverse, and those are my sort of planning for the book.
That's amazing. So, Lisa Marie Simmons, it has been a privilege having you on the Viewless Wings Poetry Podcast. In the show notes, there'll be links to all the things. And I'm so excited to hear more from NoteSpeak and read your book and everything else you have on your plate.
James, I am, when I do interviews with people like you who I admire, I wanted to have spent time talking about your poetry. Thank you so much for inviting me. I really love your work. You know it. And it was a joy for me. So thank you very much for having me.
Oh, the same for me. Thank you so much. The Viewless Wings Poetry Podcast is written and produced by James Moorhead. You can follow me on Twitter at Dublin Ranch, subscribe to the Viewless Wings Poetry Podcast, and follow us on viewlesswings.com or on Instagram at Viewless Wings.